U.S. Supreme Court narrowing the definition of what bribery is, and that could impact the landmark case against Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, who is the longest-serving House Speaker in State House history, and was also the chairman of the Democratic Party of Illinois, a nexus of power that gave him huge amount of control over politics in Illinois. But what happened in the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday with a majority opinion narrowing what the definition of bribery is, expected to impact not just Madigan's case, which is coming up in October, but also the ComEd 4 that were found guilty last year in what federal prosecutors called Madigan Enterprise. Welcome in. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Find us at America's Talking Network on YouTube for the daily program, giving you a daily digest of what's going on in and around Illinois. Greatly appreciate you being here. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. So here's the headline you'll find at thecentersquare.com. Snyder case at the U.S. Supreme Court. SCOTUS narrowing that federal bribery definition. So this was something we were anticipating. We knew this was coming because the case against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, well, he was charged in 2022. This is after his name was connected with what federal prosecutors said was a nearly decade-long bribery scheme of Madigan working through associates to get no-show jobs and contracts for his associates in exchange for favorable legislation of ComEd. And that is, of course, the allegation. You got the ComEd 4, which was former ComEd CEO. You had several lobbyists with ComEd and an associate of Madigan being charged and found guilty on that. We'll talk about that and the impacts of this case out of the U.S. Supreme Court, what it could mean for that case. But also, Madigan, later, he was charged with 22 counts of corruption, racketeering, using his official office to better himself and his associates. So that case was actually supposed to go to trial in April. Didn't happen because there was another case that the U.S. Supreme Court was taking up out of Indiana called Snyder v. USA. And here is what the headline is, of course, from yesterday out of the U.S. Supreme Court. They narrow federal bribery statute in Snyder case. Our colleague Brett Rowland at the Center Square writing this, saying the U.S. Supreme Court narrowed the federal bribery statute in a 6-3 decision Wednesday that could affect how prosecutors across the country pursue public corruption cases. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote the opinion for the majority. The nation's highest court had been asked to decide if the federal bribery statute makes it a crime for public officials to accept gratuities, payments, or rewards made after an official act. The majority said no. So here's a quote from the majority opinion. State and local governments often regulate the gifts the state and local governments may accept. The federal law does not supplement those state and local rules by subjecting 19 million state and local officials to up to 10 years in federal prison for accepting even commonplace gratuities. Rather, the federal law leaves it to the state and local governments to regulate gratuities to state and local officials. So you can read on. The decision has the potential to upend several high-profile corruption cases in Illinois, including the 2023 conviction of the ComEd 4 and the upcoming case against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. Judges paused those cases while they waited for that Supreme Court decision. Well, I connected with St. Xavier University professor David Parker, who specializes in understanding corruption, especially white-collar type crimes and government corruption. I've chatted with him about the Madigan case for years now. And here's some of his reaction to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision yesterday to narrow the federal bribery statute.
The big thing about the brothers is the application, and a big phrase is, okay, is the mens rea, the guilty mind. How are you going to look at corruptly? And it's really a gray term, very vague, and it could really open up a big can of worms with who could be found guilty under these statutes. I mean, you could be looking at 20 million public employees plus individuals working at private firms, companies, organizations that receive federal monies. So large reach. And so they wanted to look and say, are we really talking about bribery straight up versus a gratuity? So is it kind of a quid pro quo, something for something, or if it's just a matter of saying thank you. And they kind of came back and said, well, if it's merely just a thank you, a gratuity, it doesn't violate the law.
So Parker essentially clarifying that it's the after the fact that you have, where it's not, you know, say somebody sets up and says, hey, so-and-so politician, I'll give you this if you give me that quid pro quo. He says, no, it seems the Supreme Court narrowed it down to that's the only, you know, way you can have a bribery if it's before the fact, not some kind of gratuity after the fact of an official action.
Right. In this case, yes, it was definitely after the fact, because there really can't be a quid pro quo, something for something. So it just kind of happens after the fact. It's more easily to say it was a gift. And I think the funny thing, you go back with the ComEd and everything else, is you've got to look at the mens rea of the individuals involved. So I receive a gift after the fact, but then you have to look at the provider, giver, and say, is what was the intent of giving the gift? And so you have two different things. You know, mens rea is here. Is I'm giving you a gift. Hey, Greg, here, thank you for the, you know, thank you. Or I might be thinking is if I give Greg this gift, then next time there will be kind of that quid pro quo.
So, again, narrowing that federal bribery statute and how it impacts cases like the case of former House Speaker Michael Madigan, charged with 22 counts in the ComEd saga. That obviously is a pretty wild case when you read the indictment, and you also look back at the ComEd 4 trial from last year where they were found guilty, and all of the evidence federal prosecutors had. Undercover wiretaps, undercover video conversations between individuals cooperating with federal prosecutors and the likes of the ComEd 4 people who were found guilty. How this Supreme Court ruling on narrowing the federal bribery statute will impact the ComEd 4 trial that already happened. We'll take a look at that. But obviously, how is this all going to impact the trial against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, who faces trial in October? I asked St. Xavier University professor David Parker that very question.
I don't know. I think Brett Rowland has done a great job, one of your colleagues and all, and there's a couple of articles on it. I mean, as he pointed out, 15 of 23 counts against Madigan wouldn't be affected by this. So the decision might be just to kind of, you know, forget about those extra counts, those 7, and try to avoid any type of appeal and move forward. So it was really, I mean, there was hesitancy, but it was really a really smart decision to wait. So ultimately, it gets him off. It can get him off the hook for some of the charges, but not all of them. So, you know, I think it was wise to kind of wait and then maybe shut the door down to a possible future appeal based on the Snyder ruling.
So obviously, the judges saw that the Snyder case was in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and instead of going forward with the case in April, they decided to wait until October to have that case heard. So we'll be watching in that and obviously bring you all kinds of updates there. But what about the ComEd 4 trial? Because the defense attorney for Ann Pramaggiore, the former CEO of ComEd, who was found guilty with the ComEd 4, he told my colleague Brett Rowland that indeed there's likely going to be a retrial in this case because of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling, getting reaction from David Parker on that very issue.
You know, it's possible. You don't really know what's going to go on with juries. Again, is this like Madigan's defense? Their defense is this is just business as normal, politics as normal, and that's all it was. It was kind of like there were gratuities and all that, but it wasn't strict. It certainly wasn't, you know, bribery. Again, one of the things that they did point out is this is federal law, and you still do have, say, the state statutes to look at. And we saw that with Trump in New York. So, but that being said, a retrial, I think, is you got to really go back and look at the charges against them and see what evidence there was to establish a mens rea.
A lot more to come on this story, no doubt about it, especially with the trial in October of Madigan, but also what state elected officials are going to do about this, because the U.S. Supreme Court only focused on federal bribery law, not on state laws. So is there an opportunity for the legislature to beef up bribery allegations that can be leveled against legislators or local officials and mayors or whatnot who are alleged to have done some wrongdoing. Again, something we'll watch closely. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop with America's Talking Network and the Center Square. Greatly appreciate you guys being here each and every weekday morning.